Hello, welcome to Trekosophy, the podcast about the philosophy of Star Trek. Today we're going to be talking. I have today with me. I have at least in spirit and network, not physically. I have Chris McGee and Bill Allen, and I'm Ben McLean. And we're just Star Trek fans who also have some interest in philosophy. And today we're going to talk about one of the biggest episodes as far as philosophy goes, Measure of a Man from The Next Generation. And which season was that?
Season 2.
My goodness, you don't even know. Season 2, Episode 9.
Right, Season 2, Episode 9, Measure of a Man. And it deals with questions of artificial intelligence, personhood, human rights, and the law. And it just lots of big, weighty, metaphysical, anthropological questions and ethical questions being thrown out by this episode. And I was thinking before we get into the whole thing about the trial, because this is the one where Data's on trial. In fact, we probably should have said that first, because that's what most people are going to recognize. If you say Measure of a Man, you have to be somewhat of a geek to know what episode that is. But if you say, the one where Data's on trial, everybody goes,
Exactly.
Oh, I remember that. I think before we get into the trial, we really ought to talk a little bit about the poker game. What happens at the very beginning of the episode with the poker game. If you remember, Data goes and reads the rules of poker and memorizes what hands, he does something I can't even do. I can't even remember which hands are the good hands. So if you play poker with me, I might look like I'm bluffing, but really I have no clue. I'm just keeping a straight face as best I can. So you'll just get totally wrong signals from me. But Data, reads the rules and then assumes he knows how to play poker. And he doesn't understand, bluffing or when to hold your cards and when to fold and any of that stuff. He just understands the written rules of the game
And the odds.
Yeah, and the odds, and he even understands a little bit of the cultural significance because he brings a hat, one of those Vegas dealer hats, which is just really funny seeing him in it as though he's a pro when he has no idea. And then he's up against Riker, who is of course the biggest bluffer in Star Trek. Is probably Riker, other than Kirk. It's probably Riker.
I think Riker could outbluff Kirk.
Yeah, well, we never see them together, so we never know. Personally, I like Kirk better, but anyway. Oh, great! Now we'll never get what's his face, the actor on here as a guest star. I guess once I've said that, and we'll never get the Shatner either, because we're just too tiny for the gods to descend to speak with. Anyway, Riker totally bluffs him, and it kind of shows the difference between the written rules of a system and the actual practice, the actual effect, which is a theme that goes through the whole episode. It's a foreshadowing of what happens at the trial, that Data encounters this distinction between the rules on paper and what actually happens, and that as a machine he is not able to deal with what actually happens as readily as a quote normal unquote person. And I think Data, as usual, is I think somewhat of a they're playing on autism in a lot of ways, autism and Asperger's syndrome and that kind of thing.
Okay, how's that?
Well, Data has, look at some of the descriptions of people with high functioning autism or Asperger's syndrome or whatever. People who are able to process information and memorize trivia and facts and that kind of thing extraordinarily well, and understand scientific and engineering details and that kind of thing, but are sort of impaired in social interactions. It takes them, a lot longer to pick up on signals and hints and so forth of a social nature, and that's the equivalent in the real world that the writers are riffing on by Data's character. I mean, obviously there are no real androids to base Data on, you know, so that's where they're getting just about everything about Data's character, and that's where Data is getting. I mean, Brent Spinner. That's where Brent Spinner is getting his model or template for.
And
Data.
let's be clear too. It's actually Brent Spiner. I wouldn't want him to listen to this podcast and cringe every time he heard his name spelled.
Okay.
Yeah, there's another
Spiner.
celebrity we're never going to get on the show now.
Yeah. By the way, he was really great on Warehouse 13 the other night. That was awesome. He did a great job.
No spoilers. It's on my DVR. I haven't seen it yet.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's a spoiler. I mean, they had it in the trailer for the episode or whatever.
No, I mean I saw he was in it, but don't. I mean, I know they have the magic time traveling watch or whatever it is, but I want to see how they get out of the huge
I'm not
fireball that destroyed the warehouse.
I'm not saying anything other than there's Brent Spinner and Douglas Fargo and Holly Martin.
Spiner.
Don't show
Brent
up.
Spiner.
Sorry, it's a bad habit. I read the
There's
guy's
only one in his last name.
Okay, I read the guy's name in the credits, and it's a habit. I need to be sure to pronounce that right. Of course, never going to pronounce the Odo guy's name right. That's just a lost cause right there.
Oh, Rene Aubergenois, yeah.
Yeah, Rene Aubergenois.
Aubergenois. Just say it real fast and French-nese.
All right, so
watch the behind the scenes stuff on the DVDs. He pronounces it himself. So
I don't even think he pronounces it the same way twice. I really sometimes he's just messing with people.
Yeah, could be.
I mean, I remember him from Benson. He always had that little sense of humor on Benson, and they have him all repressed in Deep Space Nine. So I think he probably might have had a little fun with those, but don't hold me to that. He might have taken it seriously.
Okay. Well, anyway, do you guys have any thoughts about the poker game, about Data's general situation of being, so close to being human and so far away?
I never really saw the autism angle.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, I mean, with autism, there's some kind of disconnect where he's never going to get it. Data is, in a lot of ways, one of those child prodigies who's off at MIT at the age of 7. He just doesn't have the emotions yet. He doesn't have the world experience yet, but he's slowly but surely getting there because he doesn't know what to do when someone's upset, but he does know when someone's upset.
Well, that's true of a lot of people with high-functioning autism as well. I mean, autism comes on a really wide spectrum.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, in my mind, I never thought of Data as autistic. I thought of him as an optimistic Vulcan.
Well, what's the one episode? There's the one episode where the little kid loses his father, I think it is, and to cope with that, he starts imitating everything Data does.
Right.
I think that's that. I saw that episode, and then the same week I saw some kind of TV program on autism, and the two seem to match just amazingly. So that's where I'm coming on that.
I always thought of Data as the reverse Spock, because Spock was in that battle between logic and emotion, and he was trying to suppress the emotional side, and it took him 25 years, a full series, and 5 movies to get to a point where he could accept his emotional half.
Wait, I thought he did that in Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
He got halfway there, but it wasn't until the very end when he plays "Row, Row, Row Your Boat" that he really kind of accepts his own humanity.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that because
guess
he was always still. He lost a little bit in part 3 when he died. It did kind of set back his progress.
he died in part 2.
He died in 2. He was dead-ish in 3, and
Well,
they bring him back in 4.
Wait, he comes back in 4, or I mean, he comes back in 3.
At the very end of 3.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay.
But I mean, yeah. But so,
anyways, you're right. Data is obviously the reverse Spock character, and that's clear from the first
I'm not sure if I would call him a reverse Spock. I would have considered him the Vulcan of the show. Basically, they just didn't want another Vulcan on Next Generation, so they picked something that was the closest thing to it, probably.
Well, he has the emotionless, logical aspect, but the difference between him and Vulcans is Data wants to be
human. Yeah, okay. Whereas Spock wanted to get as far away from it as possible.
Right, and that's why I think of him as a happy Vulcan or an optimistic Vulcan.
Yeah, well, the thing is, though, I'd probably say the same thing about Vulcans and autism. There's some aspects of some of the ways Vulcans are portrayed does carry over from this idea of Asperger's syndrome, which is a total disconnect from sort of social aspects of communication for factual rote memorization and robot-like aspects of conversation.
For Vulcans, I think it's more some type of almost an OCD type disorder, or maybe some a social germophobia.
The thing about what's been called Asperger's syndrome is it's not really quite even fair to call it a sort of a syndrome. I mean, because it's not necessarily a disorder. It's almost like an excess of order. You know what I mean? It's like over-ordered. It's overboard. And but it's very complicated. There are a lot of people who are trying to get it taken out of psychology texts entirely. For not being clear enough, which is, that might be a legitimate concern. I am inclined in some ways toward agreeing with that. But I think there is clearly some kind of tendency. I've been remarked as having it some of the time. And I've seen sort of more extreme in other people a tendency to, not pick up on social cues, And anyway, but so I don't think those two things, Data being the Spock character and Data not picking up on social cues as readily or right away or as easily, are necessarily opposed. I think those two ideas sort of go hand in hand.
The one interesting thing about this aspect of Data's personality is the one thing I was thinking about while watching this trial of his was, from the very beginning, it's established that Data wants to be more human. He wants to learn and grow and become more human, which is, in the context of this trial, where Commander Maddox says Data is just a machine, he is less than human. Deep down, doesn't Data agree with him?
I don't know.
I mean, I'm not trying to play devil's advocate and defend Maddox's position. Data's a person and has those rights, but does Data see himself as enough of a person? I mean, from the very beginning, he's always pointing out the way he's not human and how he wants to be more human. And
well, what I've noticed in the episode was, there were several times where they're talking about how they're going to disassemble Data, and Data's like, "Oh, this is intriguing. Yeah, tell me more." And then there's a little later part when he's packing up and Maddox is confronting him, and Data goes on this little speech about how he's going to lose an ineffable quality of his memories, and how he's a culmination of one man's dream and doesn't want to lose that, and it's kind of almost a flip-flop there. But it's kind of hard for me to.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even at the end of the episode, he tells Maddox to continue his work.
Yeah, exactly.
And wasn't it Maddox, the person that Data called when Lal went,
Lore.
Lal, his daughter.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
The
I think he
android
did.
named her.
I know
I think
he's
it
the
was-
man that Data was writing to in Data's Day later on.
Yes. So, I mean, they did stay in touch, and
Sort of like Odo and that one scientist guy from Bajor.
Mm-hmm.
yes, Odo's quote-unquote father.
One other thing I think we want to talk about before we get too much into the trial is that lawyer lady, the judge lady.
Philippa Lavoie or whatever. Something.
Yeah, she's like yet another person that Picard knows from the past where his relationship with her is completely ambiguous, just like all of his relationships.
And we never hear from her ever again.
Right, you know?
A lot of times you get the feeling that back in Picard's earlier days, he made Kirk look like a cautious conservative.
Well, you saw how he was in the episode when Q took him back to the academy.
Yeah,
He was
picks
quite
a
the
fight
ladies'
with
man.
the Nausicaan. Yeah. I mean, Picard out Kirk's Kirk. Really?
Maybe Kirk needs a better brush with death before he'll, realize.
Well, he gets that in the books, Price of the Phoenix.
Yeah, but I'm sorry. Kirk's brushes with death. Kirk never actually had a brush with death. He just always manages to get away from it. I mean, that's his big redeeming quality, and it's part of what they.
It sure never
almost
gets
got
away
right
from it,
into the
though.
remake movie.
Yeah, well, I'm saying in the books, which is not in the episodes, not canon, but in the books, it actually happens to him in Price of the Phoenix. Sort of the ultimate Kirk versus death story is Price of the Phoenix. I really recommend that one. It's probably one of the best Star Trek books. You guys
Yeah.
still there?
Yeah, we're still
And
here.
we're contemplating your words.
I don't
I
want
keep
to.
forgetting I'm nodding, and you can't see a nod.
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, so that's why I'm not going to really say anything other than that. Other than it's the ultimate Kirk with his buddies Spock and McCoy versus death story, and it's called The Price of the Phoenix. It's a Star Trek paperback from back in the day. Get it? Okay. This lady, she was there at the Stargazer trial. What do we know about the Stargazer? Picard's old ship. Didn't it turn up in an episode one time?
Yes, if I recall the backstory, the Stargazer made contact was the first ship to contact the Ferengi, and it ran into a Ferengi marauder who said hello by opening fire.
Really? I
And-
didn't remember that. That makes sense now, though.
Well, that's how Picard ended up in command. He was I don't know if he was even a lieutenant commander at the time. I think he was just a lieutenant. When the senior bridge staff was all dead, he took command, did the infamous Picard maneuver.
Tucking his shirt in?
Okay, the Picard maneuver is you do a really brief jump at warp speed towards your target
Oh, right.
because you're traveling faster than light, so
The
you're getting
other
closer.
Picard maneuver. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the third Picard maneuver is the hand with the make it so, engage.
Okay.
So
Not
he got
bad.
a famous maneuver named after him, but it was basically one of those situations where he didn't find a peaceful solution, which goes against Federation rules. His ship got blown up and most of his crew got killed, and instead of trying to retreat, he went forward to fight. So I guess they had some questions as to whether or not he did the right thing in that situation.
So there was a big trial, and this lady prosecuted.
Yeah, and from what she said in this episode, it's standard procedure. When your ship gets blown up, we're going to have an inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
Did
Well,
that always
that
happen
makes
with
sense.
Kirk? I mean, did that always happen with Kirk? Because he blew up a lot of ships during those movies.
He only blew up one Enterprise, though.
Yeah, he only blew up one Enterprise, and he actually got in serious trouble for it.
Yeah, oh,
Sort
yeah.
of.
Well, don't they go through several Enterprises in those movies, though?
No, the first movie was the original Enterprise, and it just had a massive overhaul.
Yeah,
so
I
it
was confused about that, too, when I was younger.
It was still the same ship. They just
They just made it look pretty.
They called
Made
it a
it look
refit.
They
Yeah.
called it a refit. They upgraded its technology because it was a 30 or 40-year-old or 25-year-old ship at the time of that first movie. So it was
Okay.
given new engines, new weapons.
And they have that incredibly long flyby on the space shuttle that they're just standing there for the whole time.
Yeah, it was meant to be an artsy fartsy movie, and you can't do artsy fartsy with Star Trek. You can make it look good, but it's not Stanley Kubrick.
Okay.
And that ship eventually, Khan shot the living daylights out of it, and it was barely operational, and it was set to be scrapped.
Why is it
So
that we keep jumping back to original series? I guess I've been doing that. I need to be careful. We need to stay on Next Generation. This is our big TNG episode.
Okay, so bottom line, he only lost one ship, and yeah, he got in serious trouble for it.
Okay.
Yeah, the only reason he didn't get in more trouble was he did kind of
Save the
simultaneously
planet.
save the entire Earth. Yeah,
I guess losing runabouts doesn't count.
that's just a shuttlecraft.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, well, it's shuttlecraft didn't have warp back in the day.
Right.
Runabouts have warp. I mean, they are Starfleet vessels, and if you fire on them, you're firing on a Starfleet vessel and could, start a war. We know that.
Yeah.
So.
But at the same time, it's still more or less just a transport vehicle, not really a.
Okay.
major ship. That's the logic I'm going to go with anyway.
Okay.
It's basically twice the size of a shuttle. It's a long-range shuttle because even the normal shuttles, by the time of the Next Generation, they were warp capable.
And aren't the runabouts like twice as big on the inside as on the outside?
No, those are the TARDISes.
I was going to say, you're thinking of a TARDIS, dude.
Well, I mean, you just look how roomy the cabin is in the interior shots, and then you look at the outside when they land the things, and there's no way. There's just no way.
I think the back room is really, really small because we never see the back room. We're only seeing that one room. So I think the back room is just a closet, and they keep talking about it. Which is why everybody hangs out in the front part of the shuttle. Or
I
the
don't
runabout.
know.
Except for the episode Timescape. That's the only one.
Yeah, well, that back, yeah, we saw the back, and it was actually pretty roomy back there, wasn't it? I mean, basically, there's no way.
Well, Trill also had ridges, too, in the Next Generation. But anyway.
Yeah, basically, there's no way. It's completely, it's almost TARDIS-like how big the runabouts are on the inside. Of course, it's one of those suspension of disbelief things, but it's just fun to pick at it. Anyway, so now I guess
Back to the trial.
I was hoping we would when we talk about her, we'd say a few things about letter of the law versus spirit of the law, which is the issue she's trying to raise. It's the idea that laws have sort of an intention behind them you're supposed to understand when you execute them, and not just what's on the paper, though you have to understand what's on the paper first before you can get there.
It's also a fine line to walk because you can't ignore the letter of the law either without being kind of capricious and losing some sense of equality in the system. So you got to have both to make it work.
Yeah. And of course, the terms letter of the law, spirit of the law, those are New Testament terms. Those are Jesus's commentary on the Mosaic law in the New Testament is where that idea comes from. And then the Romans in the Holy Roman Empire, they pick it up, and the Catholic Church picks it up, and Aquinas and all those guys, and then John Locke and the American founding fathers, of course, also pick it up somewhat, and that's how the Star Trek writers get it, is sort of in this Americanized version. But my point by giving that brief overview of sort of history in general is that it's a very old idea that they are appealing to in that scene. And it's largely Christian idea, and sort of the difference between Christians and Jews, at least classically, at least from sort of classical perspective, is that Jews got too hung up on the letter of the law, and the point Jesus makes is getting to the spirit of the law. So there's your theology impacting politics for the last 2,000 years spiel.
Alrighty then.
Was I the only one who was wondering how fair she was being? Not against Data, but it seems like for a lot of the episode, she was trying to convince Picard that they were on the same side, that he should like her. She was trying to impress him, which makes me wonder.
Yeah, I kind of got that feeling too.
I mean, it makes me wonder how much she went a little too far with the spirit side and kind of let a few things slide. I mean, it was a good argument Picard made, but I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, I've been trying to kind of delay getting to the trial, partly because I have a sort of devastating attack I was going to try and make on Picard's argument. So maybe we should get
okay,
there.
if you want to stall on the trial, let's talk about one of my favorite pre-trial scenes, and probably, I mean, the one scene that I always remember. Riker's little smile.
Which one?
Which one is that?
While he's Riker
when
is
he's looking
assigned,
at the blueprints.
when he's looking at the schematics, he gets that little smile.
Yeah.
That little.
And then it quickly goes away.
Yeah. The joke in my family has always been Riker was smiling like that because even though Riker was technically the ladies' man of the show, if you do an episode count, Data got more action than Riker did.
Oh my gosh. First of all, what you just said just sort of blows my mind because you have family jokes about Star Trek. And then second of all, that you would analyze that out of that scene is just wow.
There was one night a conversation broke out about who was more appealing. It was one of the episodes. It was actually, we were watching a rerun where Tasha Yar and Data were involved. I think it was after the episode where everybody got drunk.
They were intimate.
Yes, it was after the intimate episode, but they did have a special relationship.
Yeah.
And my
Data
mother
never
thought
talks
Riker
about.
was hot, like most women did. And my dad was saying that we started doing the count and we figured out that over the course of the series, Data actually had more love interests in the episodes than Riker did. I mean, well, Star Trek's been around since the 60s. It is a multi-generational phenomenon now.
Yeah, it reminds me of something Nimoy as Spock says in the Spock versus Q show when Q says, "No wonder Kirk bagged all the babes," and Spock goes, "Yeah, that's what you think." I thought that was funny.
One of the
Well,
best
that was a thing
parts.
What?
Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say that was the thing about Spock. I mean, he actually did get a fair share of. I mean, he hooked up with Nurse Chapel, and he had the wife. He had a slew of them. Surprisingly, more than you would expect for a cold, emotionless, logical Vulcan.
What about McCoy? I don't know. Did he have any girlfriends in Star Trek?
He had one, at least.
He had the one
Uh-huh.
from the Salt Vampire episode.
The story with him is he comes onto the show immediately. He joins Starfleet immediately after a messy divorce. That's sort of this backstory on him. So he's kind of soured on the whole thing for a long time. So he's kind of angry. So in the background, at least that's what you get from reading Shadows of the Sun, the McCoy book.
Well, that's also in the 2009 movie as well.
Oh yeah. I recognize that because I read it in Shadows on the Sun. The McCoy hardback fiction building on Star Trek. Let's make some more money book. I was like, oh yeah, they're somebody's read Shadows on the Sun. Anyway, where were we? Oh yeah, okay. Now I was talking about the trial. First of all, is this the sort of thing that ought to be decided through a trial? I mean, shouldn't it be the legislature that makes these kind of decisions?
This wasn't really even a trial. It was just a hearing, wasn't it?
I guess, yeah. I mean, we call it a trial because it, has all the
Yeah, it resembles a
trappings.
trial. I mean, even at the end there, I'll go ahead and point this out. I thought it was quite interesting how Picard had his huge speech there at the end, but what there immediately Philippa goes straight to the decision. She doesn't allow Riker to cross-examine or anything.
Riker doesn't try to. He could have objected, but he didn't.
Yeah, that was. I think this is legitimately the place for a trial, because the rules said something, and Picard challenged whether or not the rule was right, because Data was ordered to go transfer to the starbase and be dismantled, and Data wanted to resign, and they said, "Oh, you can't. It's against the rules."
Yeah.
So
and,
it really isn't the kind of. I mean, it's not
they're
about.
trying to determine whether it actually is against the existing rules or not.
Right. So it's not a question for legislature, it's a question for
Okay.
the judiciary interpretation of it.
Well, the larger issues of personhood that end up getting raised are issues that ought to be settled by a legislature, because the court, isn't elected, and if we're going to talk about, personhood has an important impact on how laws actually get made, and judges aren't elected. They're it's just not, there's no accountability.
Well, that's true, but in the same regard, given how many different situations can arise, it's almost impossible to come up with a legal precedent or come up with a law ahead of time to cover every possible contingency, which is why you need judges to review the laws and say, does it apply to this situation? Because Data...
You'd think with all the robots they encountered in the original series,
that's what lawyers do almost all the time. When they have a case, they go back and look at previous case law to see if there's been any precedents. That's where they get the bulk of their money.
Yeah, but the thing is, they have run into plenty of sentient computers over the course of the original series, and you'd think in all that time somebody in the legislature of the Federation would have come up with a law that defines personhood to include artificial intelligence when that artificial intelligence is sentient or meets, some criteria.
From what I gathered regarding this trial, they had a brief earlier ruling just to get Data into Starfleet, because they did mention that there was a
that's right,
a council of officers who had to approve Data's request to join Starfleet.
Yeah,
and Commander Maddox was the only one who said no.
That was a ruling internal to Starfleet, though, and Starfleet is not the government. Starfleet's the military, and Starfleet sometimes acts a lot like the French Foreign Legion, because there's a lot of people who get into Starfleet who aren't Federation citizens and don't have all the rights of Federation citizens, and yet they are in Starfleet. This has happened not just in Next Generation, but it also happens with Nog. If you remember, Nog gets into Starfleet even though he's not a Federation citizen. And lots of people actually end up getting in Starfleet without being Federation citizens or having rights as Federation citizens.
And that's the interesting thing to look at too. I mean,
serving
in
Starfleet is a privilege, not a right. In the context of Star Trek, that it's never defined as a right to serve in Starfleet.
Right, and it's one of those things where you are, by your service, endowed with certain rights, but there is an interesting dichotomy. That's not the right word. I should stop using big words. There's an interesting, when you try and compare the difference between military law and civilian law.
Right.
Civilian law, murder is illegal. Killing somebody is illegal. Military law, you're allowed to kill somebody in certain situations. And the rules are a little bit faster and looser with when the military is allowed to kill compared to when a civilian is allowed to kill.
But also, civilians are allowed to kill under certain circumstances. There's the whole self-defense thing,
Right, but
and
I mean
man's
that's what
home
I
is his
mean. It's
castle and all that.
the difference is when a civilian kills, there's a more limited set of criteria that make it a legal killing, whereas
Yeah,
in the military, there's a broader range of situations that make a killing legal, and there are situations where killing is not just legal, it's a mandatory requirement.
yeah,
So there is a difference between the two kinds of law, which makes for an interesting comparison. I don't know if I don't know how. I mean, and the more complex you make your laws in the military, the more bogged down in bureaucracy the military gets, and it loses some of its effectiveness, some of its ability to respond to those situations you're not prepared for. So I don't know how often military laws or Starfleet laws would be changed as opposed to Federation laws.
yeah. It's they don't get too deep into the Federation legal system in Star Trek as deep as they could. Um, I mean, because they could have got, they could have given us a lot more information than they've given us about how the Starfleet legal system, I mean, the Federation legal system works. We're just generally supposed to assume it works a lot like the United States, and because the Federation is usually the United States, and that's about it.
Mhm.
So a lot of times when we try to, as writers, when Star Trek writers try to come up with what would happen in such a situation, they go from what happens in the United States, and that's about it. So so now we've talked about all these aspects of law. Uh, Unless you guys have more to say about that, let's start talking about this issue of artificial intelligence and personhood. Um, First of all, I don't think that what science fiction authors call artificial intelligence is possible. I don't believe that it is possible. Um, I know, now, see, that's a belief or an opinion. But as a matter of fact, this is in contrast. What I'm about to say is a fact. If we got something like that, it would no longer be what we call a computer in computer science, because computers in computer science are finite state machines. They, while something with consciousness would be an infinite state machine. There wouldn't be a set set number of parameters or possible states it could inhabit. It could pretty much inhabit any state, and but by the time we would get to the idea of something having this sort of idea of this ineffable quality Data talks about, it would not be what we call a computer in computer science anymore. It would be a computer plus something else. And there's always that magic something else in when we talk about Data that they aren't able to replicate. And when we talk about even Moriarty or other sort of artificial beings in Star Trek, there's always this sort of magic free will machine they have that is in addition to whatever computer parts make their brains work. And so there's this sort of dualistic metaphysics going on, not just in the obvious place in Star Trek 3 with the Katra and the body, which is supposed to be the spirit or soul in the body, but it also happens in Next Generation. There's this idea of this sort of ineffable quality that exists apart from the body, that makes something a person as opposed to an android or a robot, or a computer. And so there's something about personhood that what we call a computer when we study computer science just can't do. And that has to be, I think, part of a baseline for determining what is a person and what is not, and what has rights and what doesn't. We have to take that idea. If we don't want to call it the soul because we want to be strict materialists, okay, but we still have to take something into account where this is not the same thing as a toaster. This has to be something somewhat different. Otherwise, we'd have to be affording rights to our toasters. That'd be ridiculous.
Well, Data is, I mean, he is an interesting version of that case, because if you look at, like you were mentioning earlier, some of the original series androids that they encountered, they were walking computers, basically. I mean, on Mud's planet,
Mud's planet was definitely walking computers, yeah.
they blew them out. In the other ones, the computer, the android, was an empty shell that was not an AI of its own. It was the disembodied spirits of the aliens that inhabited the android bodies.
And which is dualistic metaphysics again.
Right. But I mean, it was still, Data is the first of those specimens that isn't an empty shell occupied by something, because I mean, it's in there. Whatever it is that makes the soul is in there. It's in that hardware somewhere. It's not a part you can identify. It's some kind of he is greater than the sum of his parts, but he's that unique case, that first case that stands apart as not just a computer, but the thing that makes it hard to see Data is obviously more than a computer is the fact that Dr. Sung made him with these shortcomings and limitations. The whole stuff with Lore, I'm pretty sure came after this episode, didn't it?
I don't think we've seen Lore yet.
Actually, Lore was in the first season.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then that explained it perfectly. Lore was the ultimate perfect everything. It already had the emotions. It had everything it needed to have. And Lore was a raving psychopath, sociopath, joined up with a giant space snowflake and killed people. In order to fix that, Dr. Sung...
Giant space snowflake.
What do you call the crystalline entity?
Yeah, I mean, that's crystalline entity. That's pretty good.
The giant snowflake. I love it.
When Dr. Sung went back and made Data, he wanted Data to be like Lore eventually, but he intentionally made Data this transitional thing that was not fully with a soul, not fully completely the human analog, but also more than just a machine. He made Data this bizarre halfway step in order for Data to eventually slowly grow and learn and adjust so that he wouldn't be this whacked out psychodoodle like Lore was.
Well, I really think the indication that most of what is said about Dr. Sung, not just in most of what's ever said about Dr. Sung suggests that Data had a soul from the moment he wakes up on the planet and is discovered. He has a soul from that point. Even though he's not, he lacks human emotions and he lacks a lot of things that make up a human soul, he at least does have a soul. Because, I mean, there are, non-emotional beings. I'm not talking about the Vulcans. They're not non-emotional. I mean, there are non-emotional beings with souls in the Star Trek universe. I forget what they're called, but they show up. Aliens that don't have emotions.
Right. They've shown up a time or two.
Yeah. And so he's like one of those when he first gets discovered. But he has a soul from the get-go. At least that's every indication I've seen from how the episodes are written and everything that's said about Dr. Sung is, so I don't really buy this idea of him having developed a soul, though he does develop what we call humanity, or a human, he takes that and sort of makes it into a human soul. You know what I'm saying? So the story of Pinocchio is, of course, a big inspiration for Data. He's a robot Pinocchio, wants to be a real boy. Or the Velveteen Rabbit is another one.
Or Frankenstein.
Well, does Frankenstein want to be normal, though? I don't remember what Frankenstein wants.
Well, the original story of Frankenstein, he wasn't a monster. He was meant to be, I mean, he was treated as a thing by his creator, and he was feared as a monster by the people, and the people really didn't like his creator for playing around with things he wasn't meant to play around. But the monster himself, the creature itself wasn't really that monstrous. It wasn't evil. It was actually something you were supposed to feel somewhat sympathetic for. It was as much a victim of everything as the townspeople.
Yeah, but what does it want? Or he want? What does the original Frankenstein want?
It wants to figure out what he wants. I mean, when he's hiding in that cave, he read some of the great books of philosophy and sat and thought about them.
Oh, right. Okay. See, I haven't read the original Frankenstein. I probably should.
I read it years ago. I mean, the movies stick with us so much more for their iconography or the symbolism and all
It's
that.
alive!
Exactly. But he was trapped in a monastery or trapped in a basement of a monastery or in a cave or something, and he had half a dozen books.
Just go with cave. It's more symbolic, Plato and all that.
He was in a cave, he had run from his master, and he's trapped in this, and he wants to figure out who he is and what he is. And so he's reading these books, and they're some of the great epic philosophical tomes of the 19th century. And eventually what the monster wants is to punish his creator for creating such an abomination, and he wants to try to, redeem himself by doing even though he sees himself almost as an evil thing, he wants to get the guy who did it to him and make him pay for making him this miserable wretch.
Well, that's messed up. That's not Data at all.
No, but it's lore.
Oh, I get it. You're saying lore's like Frankenstein. Oh, okay.
Right. I mean, well, Data and lore were both created by Dr. Sung, and there's a little bit of the crazy in Dr. Sung one way or the other, even though he's generally a nice kind of crazy. There was the episode where he pushed a button and Data overrode everything that made him himself, turned into a mindless machine, took over the Enterprise, hijacked the ship, and flew it across the galaxy after breaking Worf's collarbone and causing all sorts of mayhem.
I remember that one. Dr. Sung, Brent Spiner appeared on Enterprise, remember, right? And of course, none of us like Enterprise, but out of all the Enterprise episodes, those were actually some good ones. The ones with Brent Spiner.
Yes, where he played Dr. Noonien Sung's great grandfather. I got to thinking of the other artificial intelligences that came along where the Enterprise had to make the call. There was the exocomps.
Yeah. Is it a person or not?
Right.
Yeah, that was
Data,
a good episode too, regarding whether or not something has life or if it's just a tool.
Right. Data sided with the exocomps, and this time Picard was on the other side until Data finally managed to convince them to let them decide, just like people let him decide.
Well, I think Picard was going to try to do something to defend Data in any case, but he's trying to make double extra sure. It's kind of like what's it? Daniel Boone, I think it was, or maybe it was Davy Crockett. One of those coonskin cap wearing guys said, "Be sure you're right, and then go ahead." Davy Crockett, Alamo, right? Okay. Be sure you're right, then go ahead. That was his motto in life, and I think that's what Picard was trying to do there. I think he was going to try and do something to defend Data in any case, but he wanted to be absolutely sure. And Data's comment, about Geordi's eye, gave him the conviction of an absolute that he had to defend Data, rather than the inclination as a personal friend that he wanted to defend Data. You know what I'm saying?
And let's not forget Guinan's contribution to it all, because
master of reverse psychology as usual.
She is the brilliant guru of the show, and I felt let down by what they eventually did to her people and her character. As far as what the mystery was, once they finally spelled it all out, or as far as they did spell it out, it was less impressive than I thought it would be.
Well, they told how her people got scattered by the Borg, and they told in the generations about how she's kind of messed up because she encountered the Nexus.
And Q was actually a little bit scared of her and called her an imp.
Now, why? Yeah, that was never explained. Why was that?
That's why I'm saying it's like by the time they went around to explaining her people lived a long time and all this other things, they left out something that made them that special thing that gives Q the willies.
Yeah, I think there's probably... I don't think they ever really did tell the whole story.
Well, that was the whole purpose behind her, is that we're not supposed to know the whole story. If ever one question does get answered, two more would get raised.
Kind of like Garrick.
That's kind
Hopefully,
of the
yes.
intention.
Best left to the imagination.
But she is the wise old guru, the embodiment of that old tell your bartender your troubles kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And she does help
trope.
point out to Picard that, Picard realized that Riker made a really good case, and he wants to give up, try something else. And she points out that there are bigger issues here than just what happens to Data.
Yeah, disposable people. That's the scary thing that they're trying to get you the idea of. Many cultures have tried to somehow create disposable people, and that's always ended badly. From the ancient slavery to the Holocaust to even the some things we're still doing today. The idea of a disposable person is an alluring and a dangerous one.
And it's one that the Federation, in spite of the precedent set by Data, didn't learn. At some point, we need to talk about the Doctor.
Which Doctor?
Oh, goodness, yeah.
The Doctor.
Oh, right. Yeah, we're going to get to him. He was going to have his own episode later.
Okay. Because, but before we move, there was an episode where the Enterprise computer goes crazy and uses the holodeck to create a life form, to give birth.
Yeah.
Wasn't that some weird alien that did that to the computer?
No, that was the computer on its own.
It randomly hiccuped, and it was just such a collection of the various random bits of information and data that had collected over the most complex and advanced computer system the galaxy had, or at least the Federation had.
Yeah, I was going to say, the Federation had. There's probably
the complexity hit some kind of point where the computer just erped. And gave
one heck of an erp, man.
Yeah, I don't think it gave birth to intelligent life per se, because the computer didn't become self-aware. It was all this, like, almost animalistic, instinctive thing, where it was all sort of the holodeck was the embodiment of the subconscious. And it was just interesting how in earlier episodes they were all, these things might actually be intelligent. Nope, can't have that. Got to shut it down. And, Picard defends it when it's Data because he knows it, but then when it was the exocomps, he says, there's not enough evidence. We just can't be sure. We got to save these people instead, and I'm sorry for your loss, but we're not saving the exocomps. But then you get to this episode, and Picard has decided to let this computer create this life and just go for it. He says, all of our experiences, if they really add up to something worthwhile, we did a good thing here. So it is kind of odd how it's hard even for someone as enlightened as Picard to really rectify that.
I'm with Q. Picard, you think you're enlightened? Yeah, right.
No, that's my point. He really is good at it, but he still has that hard time seeing artificial life as
He's
life.
still human,
And in his defense, there's also the other major artificial life species in the galaxy to consider, and that's the Borg.
Well, they're...
that's going to have their own episode, probably.
Well, yeah, but one thing about the Borg, here's why the Borg is not relevant to this episode. The Borg would not exist without their biological components. They are completely dependent on both the biological and the mechanical components. If they eliminate either one, they're not the Borg anymore. So, so that is why they are not relevant to this discussion. We will talk about them in another episode. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, we're coming up on an hour here, so I'm going to go ahead and pose out this question here. The one thing we haven't mentioned.
We haven't gotten to the trial. No.
We haven't. Well, maybe we can make it a two-parter. I don't know.
And eventually that was what we ended up deciding on doing. You can hear the second half of this conversation by downloading it from our website at Trekosophy.com.